initiatives were laid out. An education sector reform bill was sent to the National Assembly. The education reform involved multiple consultations of different stakeholders at different levels. Now, the issue that we should be saying is, somewhere in the Ministry of Education are those initiatives. Somewhere in the Ministry of Education are the approvals of measures to address problems that had been identified. Now, if government did not continue on the basis of that, what exactly is the alternative that is being pursued? In 2005-2006, when we did the reforms, we called it crisis in education. Now imagine what the situation is. Take, for example, we had some tertiary education. Some 800,000 children would sit for JAMB. Only 200,000 of them would actually pass. So 6 out of every 8 that took the JAMB were failing JAMB. Of the 200 that would pass, the carrying capacity of the universities at that time was something of 142,000 or thereabout. Let us assume that that has doubled because of additional private schools and, you know, some of the initiative, for example, that this present administration has taken. Let us just assume that carrying capacity in the universities doubled. But at the same time, because of the increase in population growth rate, you can bet that you probably now have maybe 1.2 million taking the JAMB results, the JAMB exams. So you still have an issue of what happens to about 1 million children who end up not being able to go to university, even though that's their desire. We thought of that, and part of the education sector reform addressed that issue. For example, how many people know that within the National Board for Technical Education, NBTE, which is the regulator of polytechnics, we now have an additional segment or sphere in education that is based on a national qualification framework for entrepreneurship, technical, vocational education, and that you can get a certification for innovation enterprise institution, vocational enterprise institution. And the whole idea of that was that if you ended up not being able to go to university, it shouldn't be the end of your opportunity, because education is the most important instrument for ensuring social and economic mobility of your citizens. And so all of those kinds of issues were addressed in an organic manner. Who is continuing to focus on those kinds of a tangible approach?
Now, you analyzed this JAMB issue and the numbers that want to go to university and cannot because they're just not enough universities. Would you therefore advocate that Nigeria should have more universities?
There is no doubt that Nigeria needs more universities, but I tell you the approach that we took in the education sector reform. I was a minister that said, I clearly recognize, if you looked at the reform document during our time in office, I recognized, because analysis showed it, that Nigeria was underfunding education. So, for example, South Africa has 7.9% as the ratio of education budget to its GDP. Ghana was 4.4%. Even Angola was something like 4.2%. Guess what Nigeria was? Nigeria was 0.79%, not even 1%, in terms of budgetary allocation to education compared to the GDP of the country. That was what it was. So clearly we had a funding issue. But we had worse than a funding issue. We had a misallocation of investment issue. So you had a structural dysfunction of the sector. What you needed to do was to correct your dysfunction. Because I said to the stakeholders in education that if you funded education in the way that it is, it's almost like getting the fanciest dress and putting it on a person whom you really needed, first of all, to get to stand right. Even if person wasn't standing right and you put on the fanciest dress on them, they still would not look good.
Yeah.
So you needed to change the structure. You needed to change the dysfunctionality. Otherwise, as I said, you would have a well-funded dysfunctionality. And that's not what you want out of your spending. So investment in education is important. But there, in reform, you needed to understand sequencing and pace. And then you needed to define what your outcome would be. What we want for education is to get better learning outcomes at all levels of the relevant kind of education that would enable citizens not only function socially, but to be economic contributors in the development of society.
It's a pity we don't have enough time to chat with you
It
this
was
morning.
your traffic, the famous Lagos traffic.
But quickly, finally, I want your comment about the current issue on ground, this ASU strike, and the students have been at home for over a month.
I frankly think that you know, the society has got to put more pressure on both government and ASU. A principled negotiation is definitely an important way to solve any disagreement. And I did face that. I mean, it was during my time that there had been a lull in any engagement with ASU before I became Minister of Education. When I became Minister of Education, I said, we must talk. We must sit across the table. And that was how we inaugurated the Onosode negotiation team. God bless Uncle Gamaliel. Oh my God, I had to roll on the floor to beg him to do that. You know, so he agreed to lead this process. And I believe that this is a process that has some levels of understanding. There are many other issues. They need to go back to negotiate and agree, and should be, the society cannot afford to just watch on helplessly and hopelessly on this matter. Pressure must be brought on both parties to negotiate.
Dr. Obi Ezekwesili, former Minister of Education.
You know, I keep telling you guys, you know, so a university gives me an honorary doctorate. I don't go around calling myself doctor. If you choose to be recognizing, that's your business. But I'm definitely not calling myself Dr. Obi Ezekwesili. Thank you so much.
Mrs.
Yes, that's who I am.
Thank you very much. We hope that you'll find time to come back, and we hope that there's no traffic on the day you choose to come back, so that we can sit down and have at least 1 hour with you to look at education. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alera. Thank you, Kayode.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank
Sunrise will just run away and come back immediately with the home stretch. Please don't go away.
It don't matter my bread, sugar, my tea, and chum my life around it. And the job belly full, even my bank account is full. All my enemies are blood and full. Like I got away, they will put you for soup. I gave my soul, I conquer. When enemies sitting, then they start to the wonder. Jehovah, the soul now. We must swallow, I go higher.